Greetings, Mr. Hei, and thank you very much for making time for us.
Good evening, Denver, and good evening to your viewers, and thank you for having me.
Very well, Mr. Hei. Before we get into the business of the day and as far as it relates to Dr. Nujoma's contribution to economic growth and development, first things first, what do you believe this loss means for Namibia and our people? What do you make of the end of this era as has been referred to the death of President Sam Nujoma?
So, Denver, I think with the passing of President Nujoma, we are really saying goodbye to an outstanding representative of the Namibian people. You must remember that President Nujoma essentially comes from an era where it was not fashionable to do what they attempted to do at the time. You must also remember that President Nujoma comes from a time where we are starting to build what we know now as nationalism, where we did not have the current problems around tribal issues. And President Nujoma is really one of the most special leaders that we had in Namibia because he was identified by a survivor of the war of land the war of land for dispossession, Chief Hosea Kutako. And remember that that comes from the genocide era where Chief Hosea Kutako was part of the front line at the time. You know that Chief Hosea Kutako died with a bullet residue in his jaw, right? So you're speaking of someone who really passed on the torch to President Nujoma. And also, if you look at the different tribes at the time, historically, the land for dispossession was waged by the Namas and the Ovaherero people. Hosea Kutako himself was the chief of the Ovaherero people and a survivor of the genocide. And President Nujoma comes from the Ovambo tribe, if you will. And for Chief Kutako to actually see through all of that and still identify President Nujoma as really the heir that will bring about the petition that they initially launched, but also at the same time to bring about the independence that we are currently enjoying. So we are saying goodbye to a very, very special leader, a man who defined a generation, a man who will live long in the memories of those that are yet to come.
Thank you for those insights, Mr. Hei. The fact of the matter is President Nujoma then understood the assignment and he executed. And he executed very well, else what you and I are able to enjoy today would certainly not have been possible. Now, if we have a conversation around a founding president's contribution to that unfolding country's economic growth and development, one has to understand the base from which you start. And very often, at least that's my observation, we do not understand how complex the history of structural inequality actually is that we inherited at the time that we had to start a brand new country. Talk to us about what did the system, what did the picture look like in terms of the economy that we inherited at independence?
Yeah. Well, it was really an economy of very few, right? Economic opportunities were essentially, it came along racial lines, white and black. You remember that during the time, during the apartheid era, you, as a black person, you couldn't go past grade 8, which is standard 6, and there were certain jobs that were earmarked for obviously the previously disadvantaged, if I may use the term. And what that means is that they could also only be meaningfully employed in certain jobs only. Teachers and perhaps nurses were perceived to be the more glamorous, if it were. Now, what you then create is a divide between access to opportunities and being able to advance the majority. So you would have then a greater deficit in skills in the majority, right? So skills deficit would then mean they are less likely to be employable because they do not have skills, right? So because it was designed to keep them out of economic mainstream, right? So this is structural issues. This is a deliberate effort to keep a certain section of the populace out of economic activity, denying them to upskill themselves, and. So you then would automatically have a bigger unemployment among the less skilled, which is essentially the majority of the population. Again, for opportunities, again for schools, it was exactly segregated along those lines. So President Nujoma then comes in and have to navigate both on the political context in terms of making sure that we are building a country where everyone should thrive in. One Namibia, one nation.
That's no small or minor assignment.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And you must remember that on the one side, you are coming from a highly volatile political environment during the 80s, leading us into what we then now know as the Resolution 435 from the UN. And
just one moment. So that volatile environment, Mr. Hay, certainly would also have had a bearing on the capacity and the ability of the majority to access this economy from which they were structurally excluded.
Absolutely. And at the same time, you need to run a very fine balance between making sure you've got your eye on the future, but at the same time trying to open up opportunities for the majority that were excluded. And at a political level, remember that President Nujoma had to bring in a very diverse cabinet to be able to make sure that you are then able to balance out all of these competing interests, the volatility of the majority, to be able to make sure that their interests are sort of taken care of, the previously advantage that still had the levers of power and the levers of the economy, to be able to make sure that nothing terrible happens, to be able to make sure that there's continuity and we are then able to build through this. And I think you needed a president of the caliber of President Nujoma to be able to speak to national reconciliation, to be able to speak to establishing institutions of higher learning and expanding those that were there. Also going further in his own personal capacity to advance himself, to see education as the greatest equalizer. Because once you have acquired the skills, you are then in a position to be able to access the opportunities. And it is
or create them yourself.
And create them not only for yourself, but also the ripple effect or the multiplier effect that can come to the greater Namibian economy or Namibian society. So at an advanced age, he enrolls to go to school, to be a path, to really be a torch barrier in trying to inform the younger generation that the only way we are going to advance the economy and see growth that is inclusive will be through making sure we acquire the necessary skills. Namibia is a mineral-rich country, so President Nujoma obviously then did geology, and through that to really understand how we can give our resources practical expression in making sure that it benefits the majority through all of these structural issues that we had in the past.
Speaking of that practical expression, Mr. Hay, I want us to provide some particulars on the work under the guidance of President Nujoma that we then did embark upon as a country to correct the wrongs from the past, but also to get this ship sailing and in the manner that it continues to do 35 years down the line, whilst we remain aware of the challenges that persist that we need to keep working on.
Yeah. So one of the things that we can really be proud of during the President Nuyoma's time, remember that one of the success stories that we have around mining today is really the establishment of De Beers, Deb Marine, the negotiations that took place there to be able to build this huge industry that for a large part of our economic life has been the mainstay and the bedrock of the Namibian economy. It was essentially during President Nuyoma's time. You remember that Deb Marine is now a world-class institution. But the initiatives to bring it to where it is today started with President Nujoma. Remember that we inherited an economy that's structurally unbalanced, and one way of doing that was intervening in the fishing sector, right? The allocation of quotas to Namibians. You know, again, those were initiatives that came through President Nujoma. Remember that there was the call to action for the railways to be constructed and to be rehabilitated. And remember that the railway is an important conduit for moving goods and services, whether it's into the port or outside of the port. And more so also for the landlocked countries, and him being a Pan-Africanism, saw that we need to build some of these railways should be rehabilitated to be able to run and assist by bringing goods into proximity to the landlocked countries like your Zambia, your Botswana, because the railway runs until Hobabes. This one runs until in the north until Grootfontein, down south, and all of this. I think in some instances we have not been able to keep up with the momentum of some of these initiatives that were built to really get us on track and become...
Many of them are also very capital intensive, of course.
For sure.
And as a government, one then has the responsibility, because there are continuously competing interests. How do you prioritize the well-being of your people whilst also continuing with capital investments?
Yeah. So essentially, Denver, I think as part of the ongoing economic conversation, I think ultimately what we want is essentially to have more people paying tax as opposed to more people on social welfare, right? To the extent that these capital projects should be executed to be able to create the necessary jobs. And through that, you then have more people paying tax because there's disposable income that they are earning, and subsequently you'd have a smaller portion and really the advance in the elderly, to have your social net, because we've got a very young population. I think around 65% of our population are below the age of 35. So what that means is that you've got a productive citizenry that you want to build through jobs as opposed to keeping them on welfare or unemployment benefits. And So to the extent that the environment that was created at that point was really to open up opportunities, make sure that every Namibian has got a chance to be able to advance himself, to be able to build businesses, and. So I think we are indeed saying goodbye to a golden generation of leaders that have paved the way, and I think also they have really completed the political struggle, if it were. And you also remember that in his pronouncements, he would always say that the economic emancipation continues. We must make sure that our resources in our country works for every Namibian. And remember that some of the inequalities that we are currently experiencing is not necessarily, it comes from what you spoke about initially in terms of those structural issues.
That we had inherited.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then there's a need to structurally intervene to be able to make sure that we deal with these issues. There should be deliberate efforts to advance previously disadvantaged Namibians. I mean, if you think about, for instance, the discovery of oil and gas. There's been ongoing conversations around policies, around local content, and.
I wish we had the entire evening to talk about these very important matters. It's also very challenging. In fact, it's not possible to have a conversation about Dr. Nujoma's contribution to economic growth and development without having due regard to his blueprint, namely Vision 2030, and the strides that we have made, but also what it is that we need to do to deal with the gaps. But as we wrap up our conversation this evening, what is your message to your fellow Namibians about the work that we need to do as a people to honor his legacy so that we do accomplish, that we do attain economic emancipation?
Well, I think that the country that has been bequeathed to us is a country that we must build, is a country that we must jealously guard to be able to make sure that we advance the gains that were laid by the founding fathers and the generations before them. Namibia is pre-industrialization. We definitely have to industrialize as a country. There's no way that a country with the level of skills, the level of young, unemployed people that we have, that you can leapfrog industrialization. These were the vision that the founding fathers had for our country. And as part of fulfilling those visions, we must all work towards industrializing Namibia, creating opportunities, creating jobs so that every Namibian can feel part of the Namibian growth story.
Thank you, sir. Okoe Pashinene.
Thank you very much.
That was renowned economist Mr. Salomo Hei talking to us about the system that we inherited in terms of the economy when this country had attained its independence in 1990 and what needed to happen under the leadership of President Nujoma, what continues to happen, and how we also as a people have our work cut out for us to continue honoring his legacy and the contributions that he and those who fought for the country's independence made. So what we need to do is to accept responsibility of our part. We will continue with more conversations in a moment.